You guys know how much I love a good hoax, because there's nothing like a hoax to expose what somebody really thinks about things, what they really are willing to believe without one shred of evidence. Because if you believe something, you don't have any reason to believe in it, well, that's all about hostility. That's all about hatred. That's all about all sorts of bad things that adults shouldn't be believing in. Anyway, we got a couple of good hoaxes here. Why don't we move down to good old Louisville, Kentucky? This happened almost a week ago. There was a black school and a semi-black school having a football game. Somebody at the semi-black school, 33% black, they brought a watermelon to the game. Well, the NAACP, the principal of the semi-black school, the people at the other school, the black school, everybody was in unanimous agreement that this was a white thing, an act of hate, an act of hostility. And boy, we're just lucky all hell didn't break loose and a whole bunch of white kids didn't get hurt for doing that bad stuff. That's kind of where they left it until a couple days later when the NAACP in Louisville came out and said, sorry about that. We found out that was really a bunch of black people who brought the watermelon, who started these racial incidents and tried to pretend it was a white thing. Sorry about that. It's almost like it didn't make any difference. Everybody that, the day before had been condemning this act of racial hostility, racial hatred. They were still kind of condemning it, but they were kind of saying, well, I guess we need to give our kids a lot more education. We have seen what happens when a white kid is caught in an act of racial hostility. There is no forgiveness. There is no powwow. There is no everybody coming around together and singing Kumbaya, but that's what happened here. Let's take a look at what the principal of the semi-white school said the day after the thing, before he figured out how this thing was really a hoax, and how everybody was blaming his white students for it when it was really his black students for it.
I've spoken with students throughout the weekend individually, and then I addressed the students this morning over the PA, and I recognize that, we have 1,915 kids here, and that the vast majority of the kids were not there, and some of them may not have even known what happened, but I felt that it was important that we share with the kids my expectation for their behavior, not only at ball games, but at any event where they represent our school. And so we spent, a few minutes this morning over the PA, and I expressed my disappointment, not only with the incident that, we're discussing now, but there were several other, minor things that took place that we've since addressed. Right now we're investigating the situation, and we're not, ready to kind of discuss punishment or discipline and what that'll look like. And obviously, when we're dealing with minors, it's really nobody's business but the student, the school, and the families. But I can assure you that we are going to and are in the process of addressing it, and we're going to address it not only with those students, but all of the students that were involved, and use it as an opportunity to teach our kids about respect and understanding.
NAACP leaders say the watermelon incident is disturbing, and now they want to use it as a learning opportunity.
We've learned that the incident actually involved students of color.
The incident in question came last Friday night at a high school football game between Ballard and Central. A watermelon was passed around Ballard's student section. And for the students of color who started it, Louisville NAACP President Raul Cunningham says it came as a surprise.
Does it make it better or worse? For me personally, it was very shocking.
While an older generation like Central's principal Raymond Green understands a watermelon can be a racist symbol,
I was aware of the historical connotations of that act and what that meant.
Cunningham says the younger generation does not.
Because if someone had given me a watermelon in high school, I would have thrown it at them. Therefore, we have a different perspective of what segregation was.
Nearly 80% of Central students are black compared to about 30% of Ballard's. Green called the incident inappropriate and says he's been in communication with Ballard's principal. Both intend to use this incident as a learning opportunity.
We cannot control other people or what they do. We can only control what we do. We need to recognize the world that we live in. We can't fool ourselves into thinking that that we live in a racial utopia. We have to move forward in a great way.
Then Tuesday night came a peace offering of sorts. Ballard and Central squared off again, this time on the volleyball court. That's where Ballard players offered yellow roses to Central. And the NAACP says the schools need to discuss the historical and racial significance of the act. It also says JCPS needs to immediately develop and implement its racial equity plan.
Worst possible thing in the whole wide world. No apologies. No, they don't do apologies. They just do, well, you know, you guys ought to get educated. That's their version of an apology. Pretty much the same day, slightly different part of the world. Here's a story. Woman made up story about confrontation with Trump supporters. And the story goes on to say about how she was driving around. Here's where the story gets weird. She's driving around. She sees a bunch of white kids in the car, and they go, "Hey, Trump 2016, go back to where you came from." So she reaches her home. Somehow, the next part gets kind of fuzzy, but here's what happened. She went to sleep in her car in front of her house, even though she knew there was a bunch of crazed Trump supporters seeking to do her harm. So she goes to sleep, wakes up, and finds her tires are slashed. She calls the cops. Didn't take the cops that long to figure out this tissue-thin story was just another story of black on white, white on black violence and hostility. That was one big, fat hoax. But what an insight into how eager, how urgent, how desperate so many people are to be a victim of this racial violence, of this racial animosity. How easy it is for so many people who should know better to believe it. You know, every time I see one of these stories of a hoax, I always remember the first and only rule of journalism. If your mother says she loves you, check it out. I mean, what did we just see over the weekend? This is a small example of it. What did we see over just a couple of days ago? The New York Times runs an article saying Nikki Haley paid $57,000 in tax money for a bunch of drapes at her lush digs at a hotel in downtown Manhattan. Of course, not only wasn't it true, if you go back to the New York Times, you'll see the New York Times and when they did a story about her predecessor, her Obama predecessor, they took everything that was bad about Nikki Haley living the high life in this beautiful place. And they took that really bad thing and they made it a virtue about her predecessor. Oh, there's Susan Rice. What's her name? I forget her name. The previous UN person. But she is living in this ridiculously opulent apartment near the UN building. And the style section of the New York Times just couldn't get enough about saying how elegant she was, what a great representative of the United States she was. More. How do you like it? More. And Nikki Haley, and they see Nikki Haley doing the exact same thing with stuff her predecessor bought, and they cannot heap on the scorn and condemnation fast enough,
We will sing one song for
because they know
Kentucky home.
even when you make false allegations, even when you talk about hoaxes, even when you let you print this hoax and repeat this hoax without one scintilla of proof, they know that'll never make the black kids angry.